I'm out on the road a lot, I do a lot of schools, and this is my favorite part of the job, to get to meet people like you, because you're my future, folks. And when I look at you, it sustains me, because it makes me feel like, by golly, all of this is, our world is in good shape. When I look at you, when I look at the news, no. But when I look at you, I'm thinking, okay, I think we're gonna make it, because you're extraordinary, young people. And you speak that you're a visual learner. Here's what's happening in public schools, which is terrifying. Because of the No Child Left Behind mandate, all of the money that would be spent on art, music, and drama is disappearing. So therefore, those subjects are going. Even social studies is no longer studied in public schools because they can't be tested in the No Child Left Behind mandate.
Yeah, my family and I don't play any video games.
Well, video games, I mean, they're good for acuity, visual acuity, and your reflexes. The only thing I have against them, you know, I travel a lot. I was just telling this little gal back here with her heart ears on, when we were coming in, you know, I go around a lot, and I travel alone, so I'm usually sitting at a dinner table in a restaurant by myself. And people feel sorry for me, but I put a book in front of me, and then I eavesdrop on every conversation around me. But here's something that I find disturbing. You see, my family, we were poor. We went out to dinner. That was a big deal. Well, I see families out to dinner. Every one of them are on their cell phones or they're text messaging. And I'm thinking, my God, don't you want to talk to each other? Apparently not. Which makes me wonder, well, then why go out socially together? Why don't you just lock yourselves in your rooms at home and text each other? What's the point? Don't even touch each other anymore. As a matter of fact, build little cubicles on the property so you don't have to have anything to do with each other. And it's interesting. Yes?
Can I shake your hand?
When you leave, absolutely, because I want to touch your hand so that you can say, you will be 6 people away from Lincoln. I have 2 connections to Lincoln. One through Sheldon Russell Curtis, but my house that I live in is an historical farmhouse that stood during the Civil War. When I bought it, they said Abraham Lincoln walked through this house. He was coming from Jackson, Michigan. He was on his way to Springfield, Illinois. Now, I'm a Lincoln scholar, and I know he wasn't there during his presidency. I know that. So I just kind of thought, oh, okay, if that's what they want to say. I tell people that anyway, because it's a good, you know, it's a good lie to tell people. Well, it turns out, when I did research when I was doing January Sparrow, Charles Gorham, at the end of that book, who helps the Crosswhites escape to Canada, became a senator in Michigan. He started a political party in Jackson, Michigan, called the Free Men of the Oaks, Free Men of the Soil Under the Oaks, which turned out to be the Republican Party. Lincoln was their first candidate. He was at a rally in Jackson, Michigan. He really did come to my house, but this was before he was president. He came with Robert Todd Lincoln, his son. They went out and played catch in my front yard. They said he took a ladle of water and had a sandwich or 2. Then he climbed back on the stage, because at my house is where they changed out the horses. Got back on the stage and went to Springfield, Illinois. So when I walk through my house, the woodwork is still intact. They never replaced it or refinished it. His DNA is in my house. So I touch it and think, oh my God, can you imagine if you could be kind of recede into the wall and somehow time travel so that I'm standing there and I could watch him walking down my hall. I'm curious, what did he sound like? He was an amazing writer, and his speeches are a thing to behold. When you read them, they're amazing. He had what's called Marfan's disease, which meant he was very, very tall, probably lengthened his vocal cords. So I imagine his voice was lower. But anyone who wrote about him in his lifetime that had heard him said he had a very high voice. And that doesn't follow. If he had Marfan's, he couldn't have. So I don't know. I would just love to hear what he sounded like. Yes?
Do you illustrate all of your own books?
Yes, I do. She's asking, do I illustrate all of my books? Now, here's how my learning disability went. In my day, you didn't learn to read till 1st grade. Now they're forcing children in the kindergarten to read, which I think, oh, shoot, can't they be kids for a moment? But at any rate, When I fronted up in that class, all of us were in the Green Circle Reading Club, and by the end of the year, I was the only one. Everybody else had graduated to some other level, but the one thing I could do was draw. Now, the type of disabilities that I have means that one side of the brain has shut down. The other one goes into hyperdrive, which means sometimes if you can't read or write, you will also have an extraordinary talent in art. In my case, I understand congruency of 3 dimension. This is huge for a 4-year-old. I could walk in your house once, I still can, once, and I can draw you a complete floor plan with elevations. I've always been able to do that. I know geometrical figures that are out flat. By looking at them, I can tell you exactly what they're going to be. And I can do it like that. But I can't read, or couldn't do math, couldn't do things that other kids could do routinely. I couldn't. So the drawing was always there, and that's kind of how I got respect, is even kids who tease me, if they saw me draw, they back off for a minute and go, whoa, here's something you can do. Didn't do serious art study till I was in high school. And I'm writing a book actually about that teacher. Her name was Violet Chu. She was from China. She had a very thick Chinese accent, but she taught me more about art than I will ever know. She was just an amazing human and truly an artist, and it is she that taught me how I read. Now, I see a green exit sign there. All right, let's use this writing over here. Most of you, when you look at that wall, probably identify those words. Respect, for instance. You see the blue letters. That isn't what I see. I'm looking at the white pattern that surrounds them. I read negative space. And Violet Chu put me in front of the works of M.C. Escher. This is when I began to understand what negative space is and how negative and positive space morph. In other words, have you ever seen that drawing? When you look at it one way, it's a goblet in the center of the page. But if you click your brain and look at it another, it's 2 faces facing each other. It's 2 profiles. That's morphing between positive and negative space. So the difficulty I had in reading with the dyslexia isn't that the words shook this way. They were moving in and out of my field of vision. So by the time I could identify one word, too much time had gone by, and the teachers just passed over me and went on to the next kid. So how I handled that and got all the way to my 14th year without getting help is I am also good at memorizing what you say. If the kid next to me read a passage, I memorized it instantly, so then when they called on me, I read exactly the same passage, except I wasn't reading it. I was saying what they just said. Then I'd get yelled at because I wasn't keeping in the right place in the book, but then at least they left me alone. My whole school career was hiding. The whole school career was about camouflaging. I mean, literally camouflaging and hoping nobody was going to notice me. And the person who saved my life was George Velker at Willard Junior High in Berkeley. And he came bounding into the room. He was a mid-year transfer in. He came into that room, and what I loved about him is he wore bright colors, and he talked with his arms, and he was animated. He played music during class, classical music, and very quietly. He had ambient light. By that I mean he turned off the overhead lights, and we had lamps on his desk and in various places in the room. He kept bright sunlight in the room. He had green growing things on the ledges. He had the old masters' posters all over the room. And he was the first one who stood behind me and just had a fit about the art and said, oh my God, you can draw, wow. So he one day asked me to stay after school to wash blackboards. Now, you kids would have no idea what a blackboard is. You have those whiteboards that use felt pens on, don't you? In the old days, it was slate, and you did it with white chalk. At the end of the day, that had to all be washed, or you couldn't see it the next morning. He asked me to stay after and wash blackboards, but he suspected I was in trouble, and he gave me a sponge and a bucket, and he put on My Fair Lady, and I'm washing that board, and he asked me to make letters and numbers with a sponge this big. And that's when he realized the kind of trouble I was in. And he paid out of his own pocket for a reading specialist to work with me. And that is how I learned to read when I was 14 years old. Yes, sweetie?
Another question is, did you write thank you, Mr. Polacco?
Yes, I did.
You did?
Well, his real name is George Felker. That's the teacher I just told you about. And here's why his name is different. You kids may not realize this, but I can draw you and use you in a book without your permission. I cannot use your name. If I use your name, you and your parents have to sign a release to the lawyers of my company. By the time George Felker's book was ready for publication, he was out of the country on vacation. And the lawyer said, wait a minute, where's the release? I said, you don't need one, trust me. I know him, that he's not gonna have a problem with this. They said, no. So by changing one letter of his name, they satisfied the law. So his real name is Felker, F-E-L-K-E-R, but in the book it's F-A-L-K-E-R. And that was all for dumb legal reasons, but that's why. So yes, yeah, I've written about him. He was an amazing, amazing person. Anybody got any other questions? Yes?
Is he still alive?
No, he passed away about 14 years ago. What's interesting is I've gotten letters from maybe 6 other kids that he helped, and they're all in their 60s like I am. And I cherish those letters, and I have them in the book with a photograph of him, the very first book of that publication. But he was amazing, and your teachers, truly, they are the last heroes we have standing in our country. They're under fire for all sorts of reasons. There's no child left behind mandate. Are you guys bailed up by that here? Or is it because you're a private school, you don't have to? In public schools, it's a horror. They're forcing teachers to teach children to pass tests. That is completely different than making that child understand the subject, having them fall in love with it, and love to learn. Very different. So, I hear teachers all over the country saying with tears in their eyes, my God, I used to be able to do creative things in a classroom. I can't anymore. I've got to teach to these numbers. And they're measuring children by test scores. And let me tell you something, you are measured by something far greater. Test scores to me mean nothing. I'm almost 67. I don't think I could pass a written test. They scare me. I absolutely freeze up. Can't even write my name in a written test. I get so scared. So what happens to the kids in schools that are like me? They're going to fall through the cracks. They're going to fail. And they're going to be made to feel that they are a failure, when in fact they most certainly are not. So that's what's happening out there. You're very lucky to be here, I think. Yes, sweetie?
What's your favorite book that you wrote?
She's asking which one of my books is my favorite that I've written. That's like asking me which one of my children I love the most. I can't answer it. I love the books where I bring back people that have since passed away in my family and draw them. Like Orange for Frankie, for instance. That's my grandmother's entire family. And when I look at that dinner table scene, there they are. And they come to life for me, but what makes me happy is they come to life for you and you didn't know them. But in a way, you're bringing them back just by reading it and looking at their faces. And that makes me feel good. One book, I'll show you this one. I don't know if you kids have seen this. Most of my books are for kids much younger than you are. The Keeping Quilt is kind of the signature piece of my mother's family. When you look at this book, and I invite you to, all of it is drawn in black and white. In other words, I use pencils. Number 2 and number 6B pencil. But I did a trick. There are 2 things on that page that are in color. And that was because I wanted you to look at the scarf she's wearing and the dress she's wearing, because they become something, they actually become a character in the story as well as she. That little girl was my great-grandmother. She came here all the way from Russia when she wasn't much bigger than you. She came with her mother and her father and her sister, but she had to leave behind grandparents, everyone in her family. And in those days, when you left Russia, you never were permitted to go back. My mother was the first one in the family who went back to Russia to visit. Up until then, they weren't allowed to. They were considered traitors, so they couldn't go back. So, what made Anna feel better, every day she used to put that little blue dress on and the red babushka, because I guess it made her feel like it was next to her skin, Home was next to her.